I want to thank very warmly the European Confederation of Conservator-Restorers Organization, the E.C.C.O, for the honor of an invitation that allows me to attend this event in a moment of particular relevance. This year, 2016, this General Assembly celebrates, in fact, the 25th anniversary since E.C.C.O's foundation and the beginning of its activity for the promotion of the conservator-restorer profession in Europe. But this year is an important date for ICCROM too, as this is 60 years since UNESCO General Conference in New Delhi adopted the proposal to create what would become ICCROM, the Intergovernmental Center for the Study and the Improvement of Conservation Methods. This coincidence provides an opportunity to make some reflections on the roles of the two organizations. Roles that are very different, not only because of the different age of foundation, which is the aftermath of World War II for ICCROM, the consolidation of the process in the European Union through the adoption of the euro for E.C.C.O, but also because of the very different membership, which is basically professional for E.C.C.O, representing 24 national organizations across Europe and having approximately 6,000 professional conservators, and strictly intergovernmental, so political, for ICCROM, to which currently 135 member states participate and does not include private association or individual professionals. ICCROM has a staff of only 35 people, about 10 professionals, so it's in no way comparable to E.C.C.O. On the other hand, both organizations have strong similarities in their scope. E.C.C.O seeks to develop and promote on a practical, scientific and cultural level the profession of conservator-restorer of cultural property through promoting a high level of training and working toward the legal recognition of professional status. ICCROM was founded by UNESCO to sustain its member states in the training of conservators and restorers in a period when science-based training was practiced in very few centers. Both organizations share the same awareness and goal that conservation is essential to ensure that cultural heritage in all its form and diversity is used for the development and betterment of societies. Today, the European construction is in a moment of difficulty. The rise of national agendas, primarily as a reaction to migrant issue today, are impeding agreement on respective and common roles in dealing with transnational ideas, such as the concept of European identity and heritage. What does it mean today to be European? Or indeed, a collective European responsibility towards humanitarian catastrophes, such as the mass migration of people from Middle East and Africa. Let's start by taking an historical perspective on training for heritage conservation over the last 60 years. In the first decades, the focus was on protecting the physical substance of cultural heritage, buildings, stones, polychromy, tiles, etc. The stuff of the artworks housed in museums and private collections, with an increasing emphasis placed on analytical techniques. To this end, science and technology was successfully combined with the traditional art historical approach, and the publication of Brandi's Teoria del Restauro marked the moment in which a new paradigm was conceived for restoration conservation as a science with a dual philosophical background, based on a scientific approach to the material of heritage integrated with an historic aesthetic interpretation. These years were also full of a new enthusiasm for the public ethics of heritage, in response to the previous elitarian and exclusive notions of heritage predominantly held in private ownership. And let's not forget here the relevance of hard science as a useful tool for establishing authenticity of very expensive artifacts. In the aftermath of the Second World War, which had seen the destruction of entire cities and the epic endeavor of the monument's men in answer to the Nazi spoliations, increasingly conservation was seen as a public service. In Europe, the primary goal was to restore urban heritage destroyed by the conflicts. However, in other parts of the world, and in particular in countries recently gaining independence from their colonial past, there prevailed a vision of conservation as an activity for building on a national independent basis the heritage conservation and management. This desire is reflected in the large number of countries from the developing world which adhered to ICCROM during this first period. These public values have been reinforced in the following decades. However, given the societal evolution that has taken place in this time, what are the values of cultural heritage today? Why and what do we conserve, and for whom? If values are at the core of conservation decision-making, then what's the role of the people? The last 20 years have witnessed increased attention given to the voice of communities and civil society and their role in defining and protecting cultural heritage. Let's just remember the Faro Convention. But how has the heritage conservation professional sector responded to this? Has this changed its principles and practices, its role, its recognition? The answer to these questions are perhaps not yet clear, but what is clear is that changes are ongoing. As an archaeologist, I have been, for about 40 years, a public professional working for the conservation of archaeological heritage in Italy, trying to follow the rules of conservation as laid out in the international charters. But even more, so has written in the Italian Constitution of 1946, in particular in the Article 9, which places heritage among the so-called primary values to be protected by the state, along with democracy, freedom and dignity of the persons, freedom of political association, equality, rights to work, to health, to education, regardless of any economic implications. This is in theory at least easy when you have simple cases such as, for example, the preservation of a Roman villa versus a new private development project. But over the last decades, archaeological heritage has increasingly been challenged by big public infrastructure projects, such as the development of metropolitan railways in cities or high-speed trains or pipelines in the countryside. Opposing such developments on the basis of the need to conserve in situ every single found item would not only be absolutely impossible, but also anti-historical, as the improvement of modern urban communication is in itself a social goal of no lesser importance than cultural heritage. Thus, archaeologists adopted the principles set out in the Council of Europe La Valletta Convention on rescue archaeology, implying a negotiation between the developers of public works and archaeologists, even though the professional rules on how exactly this is to be put into practice have not yet been formulated. Over this period, society has changed, and of course continues to change. What is increasingly important today is the role of heritage for human society. Cultural heritage should be considered as a driver for the development of all societies, not only for the happy few, able to understand and speak the specific language of the hearts. Heritage professionals have to adopt a broader vision. Today, the focus is on the relationship between cultural heritage and the environment, the community, and the larger society. Heritage is local, being concretely localized in places, in a place, but more and more, the eyes looking at it must be global also, using global parameters to understand its universal human values in addition to the local ones. Following the principles of UNESCO and United Nations, but also according to its own tradition, ICCROM considers cultural heritage in its diversity, all forms of heritage, and also heritage of all societies. We must be able to integrate the legitimate study of each cultural component of our multicultural societies, and importantly, their interrelation with each other. This cultural dialectic can help in the often uneasy relationship between local populations and newly arrived migrants. Cultural heritage has always been a target in conflicts, and after World War II and the Hague Convention, we could have hoped that this was over. But as we learned from the destructions in Iraq, in Mali, in Syria, Libya, it is not so. However, there are also some lessons to learn from these cases. Lessons related to the education. Thus, Daesh militants, many of whom we have seen were educated in Western schools, destroyed Assyrian reliefs, labeling them heretical, both as pre-Islamic idols and as constructs of the Western crusader science of archaeology. It means that we, the heritage sectors, archaeologists, we have failed since museums and heritage institutions have not succeeded in extending educational programs to these guys when they lived in European suburbs. In reflecting on these diverse components, it's clear we will be increasingly challenged by the meaning of cultural heritage. What's cultural heritage today for us? And tomorrow, when we celebrate another 50 years of E.C.C.O. All of us have experienced in our lives not only how concept of heritage has changed, but also how this change has accelerated in our times. As an archaeologist well acquainted with Greek and Roman art, educated in the 70s through the pictures and the casts of classical sculptures, like the Pergamon Museum here, but also in the following years through the studies of the shards of rough Roman pottery, or just sampling the pollen in the soil of the gardens of Pompeii, I was nevertheless surprised to discover that just 30 years before, the inventory of some of the richest houses of Pompeii did not list more than 300, 400 items, whereas by the 70s, the inventory for the dwellings of minor importance included 10 times the number of objects. The reason for this is that in the first case, only high-value things were inventoried, whereas by the 70s, a much broader range of objects, broken, unbroken, high value or not, were included. Clearly, for the archaeologists of Pompeii in the 30s, the concept of heritage did not include such objects, to the extent that shards were not considered heritage at all. But it is in this discarded and disregarded material, such as shown here in Herculaneum, you see this channel, that the lives of the non-elite are revealed, giving a larger societal perspective on the past and also our impact on the environment. Continuing to quote examples from my career, years after, I was a bit shocked when in the Museum of Naples I received exhibitions featuring famous contemporary artists, among them this work, 1,000 Years by Damien Hirst. The author wanted to confront gallery goers with an entire life cycle, from flies laying eggs in a severed cow's head to maggots, and then more flies to begin the cycle again, except for the ones zapped by the insectocutor. I admit my ignorance in contemporary art, but evidently works of this kind, which use new and also highly ephemeral materials, will pose serious conservation challenges in the future and necessitate the adaptation of principles and methodologies and criteria towards an approach of conservation through documentation. The same is true also for other ephemeral expressions, including performance art and street art, such as this, William Kentridge's recent Triumphs and Laments, a project for Rome, which comprises monumental images such as these, which currently decorate the embankments of the Tiber in Rome, but for a short time only, the artwork being created through selective cleaning of microbiological growth, which in time will recolonize the whole surface. The conservation and restoration of audiovisual heritage has for some time now been a focal point of the training and research in the sector. However, digital heritage remains as yet an under-recognized area, but one which will without doubt grow in importance and require increasing specialized attention. In many cases, the primary challenges for managing heritage lie not so much in preserving the material of heritage, but rather in how to interpret and preserve its intangible values. This can be particularly difficult with regard to communicating these values to the public, owing to the multiplicity of narratives and the inevitable mutability of meanings, especially in sensitive cases when these are not an expression of society cultural achievements, but rather witness to its failure. The conservation professional has an important role to play as an interlocutor and communicator of heritage, which as a society and its relationship with heritage evolves, requires the development of new skills and new approaches. While our primary focus may be on tangible heritage, nevertheless, non-material intangible heritage is also our concern. ICCROM often works on intangible heritage, such as that represented by oral traditions, performing arts, and other aspects of human behavior in which tangible and intangible are intrinsically interconnected, the one as a physical document of the other. Conservation professionals are typically trained in the conservation of the material substance of heritage, but the conservation of its intangible aspects depends on much more delicate social elements, and only the conservation of the spirit of the community can prevent this heritage from becoming mere touristic shows. Conserving authenticity in living communities in which tourism plays an important economic role for sustainable development is a real challenge. And here again, the need for ongoing development of ethics, principles, and approach is very high. Nevertheless, amidst all this change, there is a continuum, interdisciplinarity. As in the past, when art historians, archaeologists, chemists, physicists, engineers, architects, photographers needed to work together with the conservator-restorers, today the conservator-restorer cannot be an island. As the number and diversity of their professionals, both within and outside the heritage sector, to consult and to work with is ever increasing. In 60 years, the focus may have moved considerably, but ICCROM has always promoted interdisciplinarity, not only in the work of the conservator-restorer, but in all the professions involved in conservation decisions. With time, the focus will move further, become even more expansive and more inclusive, from the larger heritage community, including natural heritage, to the global community of living heritage, people-centered approach to conservation. All this requires a repositioning of the professions, an openness to even more interdisciplinary work, bridging with other fields to link with other knowledge. Despite this increasingly larger framework of connections, sometimes the professions of conservator-restorer is still seen as a kind of a craftsmanship. It is certainly true that conservation restoration has its roots in craft-based traditions. Indeed, art itself has a craft component. And certainly the material technical knowledge is vitally important for the conservation of the physical substance of heritage. But what is more important for defining the profession of conservator-restorer is the conceptual interdisciplinary framework for conservation, the principles, the value systems, the ethics. This is the real framework holding together the so many and so different specializations in conservation. It is this conceptual framework that we must promote and advocate for. But this conceptual framework is in need of review. If in recent years conservators-restorers have played an important role in the adoption of important decisions, such as the decision to present the statue of Marco Aurelius no longer on the Piazza Campidoglio, but rather in the Capitoline Museum, a hard decision indeed for politicians, this has been due to the interdisciplinary dialogue developed between archaeologists, architects, and conservators. Another example of difficult decision made on conservation grounds was, just by example, to advise against the rehashed bronze travel for exhibitions. I had a part in that discussion, and can testify of how significant and informative the discussion was with the conservator-restorers that carried out analysis and tests on the sculptures and other similar cases in the Vatican museums. The input of conservator-restorer is vital in heritage decision-making, but in the future, this will be increasingly requiring the conservator-restorer to consider broader issues beyond the material aspects of heritage. Issues like the energy consumption and carbon footprint implications of preservation decisions, this will become impossible to ignore. How much heritage do we keep? And how do we keep it? If everything carries potential information value, how do we recognize it and how do we manage it? This conclusion has evidently an epistemological aspect common to all other science, and connected with the previous, there is the problem of the big, massive archival collection, massive storage, massive buildings, territories, urban dimensions of heritage. The issues of the places where heritage is used and accessed, these are changing: outdoors, public space, or the mobile telephone, the mobile telephone. ICCROM and ECCO have worked together in the past, mainly in relation to the legal issues concerning the conservation restoration profession within Europe. Last year, we signed a new Memorandum of Understanding to continue to pursue this objective and to advance the creation of a legal framework for the recognition of the role of the professional conservator-restorer. However, the conservator-restorer is but one actor within a larger interdisciplinary sector that is responsible for the care, interpretation, and sustainable management of heritage. In order to develop a legal framework to effectively position the conservator-restorer within the broader heritage sector, it's clear that this has to go hand in hand with the development of the conceptual interdisciplinary framework for conservation, that it is fit for purpose in today's world and adaptable to the future. To be successful, this critical review and revision will require a common effort on the part of all interested parties, including conservator-restorers, naturally, in the light of the current reality. And of course, ICCROM will be happy to offer a platform for this reflection. Thank you very much, and best wishes for the anniversary.